Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Rise Up Rooted Symposium. I am so glad that you are joining us for our 5-day global conversation with leaders from around the world who are helping us learn practical ways and reasons that we all should be deepening our relationship with the natural world. It benefits us, it benefits the entire planet, it benefits the more than human world as well. So that is what the Rise Up Rooted Symposium is all about. And I am your host for this event, Alex Strauss. And today I am super excited to present to you Tigrilla Gardenia. Tigrilla Gardenia is a nature-inspired mentor, leadership coach, speaker, teacher, and world ambassador for plant intelligence. Her polyethnic and polymathic journey has driven her to be a music engineer, a high-tech release manager, intentional dance producer, circus co-owner, Kabbalah teacher, and even go on tour with Cirque du Soleil. For more than 11 years, Tigrilla has had the honor of being a Damanhur citizen in Italy, which is one of the largest spiritual eco-communities in the world, where a chance meeting with a musical plant led her to her full-fledged plant reawakening. This propelled her to all things plant collaboration, becoming a biomimicry facilitator, earning a master's in Futuro Vegetale, or vegetal future, plants, social innovation, design at the University of Florence, and founding the Naturally Conscious community. Her roots firmly planted in the arts, communication, and the avant-garde, Tigrilla uses her expertise to empower creatives, naturepreneurs, and nature-inspired professionals to take action with confidence and as co-creators with the plant kingdom as well. Tigrilla, thank you so much for being with us. I'm so excited to, I was saying to her before we started recording, I have long wanted her to be a part of Rise Up Rooted. I'm glad we got her this year. How you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
And you're joining us from Italy today.
I am home in Damanhur. Feels good to be home.
Lovely. So, so many things to ask you about in that bio. We could just spend all day just talking about your background, but just give us a little bit about how you came to be doing this work. Obviously, you've been doing all kinds of interesting things all over the place. So tell me what brought you to be working with plant intelligence.
So I, as you said, I live in Damanhur, very lovingly called Hogwarts for adults, because it's like a community like no other. Most people can't imagine it unless you ever come. So if you want to come, please,
wow.
I'm here, come. And so in Damanhur, we have as part of our philosophy and our spirituality, we have a very deep connection with nature. We believe in what we call the three mother worlds, the human animal world, the plant world, and the world of the nature spirits. And really the need that we have in order to reunite these three worlds that were once completely connected and united, that today have been split out. And that's why we feel this separation from nature oftentimes, and why we struggle so much through so many different parts, because parts of us are literally missing. They've been ripped out. So here in Damanhur, it's a common practice to spend time in the Sacred Woods Temple, to be immersed in nature. We live in a beautiful Valkyzela Valley, to be really connected into that natural world. But we still struggle from plant blindness. I mean, plant blindness is this whole concept that as much as we love plants, we fail to really see them as independent beings that they are, and more importantly, for everything that they do and they give us. And I was, victim of plant blindness, going about my day, seeing nature in its kind of outside, but not really recognizing the individual plants. Until one day I was walking through our capital and I heard this music, and I love music. I was a music engineer. I have this strong connection to music. Music to me really speaks. And so I couldn't figure out where this music was coming from. It was really unusual. It was very different from what I had always heard. And when I traced it back, the musician was a plant, using a device that we've created here at Damanhur and called the music of the plants. And given the fact that music for me is so interpretable, not interpretable with like the words mean this, but more like it's a way for me to really connect. All of a sudden I was looking at this plant and I could feel like the plant was talking to me. I could understand through this music what the plant wanted to say to me. And that just blew open what I call my full-fledged plant reawakening, the idea of, oh my goodness, I have to learn more. I have to learn more about this device, but more importantly, I have to learn more about how is it that the plants are able to use the device. And that's where it all kind of started. It started spiraling there. I started to study plant intelligence, plant neurobiology, plant consciousness. There was very little literature at the time that was just starting to come out, but it was so exciting to see that there was these nuggets and pieces of what I was feeling on a somewhat spiritual, musical way. There was starting to be the analogous information of trying to help us understand how this is happening, even biologically speaking and scientifically speaking. And for me, being able to bring those pieces together to really see the full picture and understand that these beings, these ancient beings, 470 million years on this planet, like on land, have been here all along with their memories, with their experiences, with the ability for them to learn from the environment, from the ability to adapt. There was just so many different pieces. And that was it. I fell down the rabbit hole and I've been living down there ever since.
Oh my gosh, what a fantastic story. I'm curious about this device. We had a speaker in the last symposium that actually demonstrated it but just for people who are not familiar with it, just take just a minute and tell us what this is so people can picture it. And then we're going to move on to other things. But I'm sure people are going, if they're not familiar with this, they're like, what? Plant music? What is this?
Exactly. Okay. So Google music of the plants, or you can go to my website and there's also ways for you to get there. But basically this is a small device. There's now multiple versions of it. One that's like a little round one, a little bigger one, and then one that sort of sits at home. And the device is a musical instrument for plants, essentially. Like when you consider it and you boil it down, this device, what it does is it has a cable, very simply connects into the plant. It hooks with an electrode to the leaves, to a leaf, and then it connects also into the soil, into the root system, and it takes the electrical impedance, so the difference in electrical potential between these two, and then it has an algorithm that says, okay, for this plant, I'm going to see what are the highest and lowest notes the plant makes, and then I'm going to map all the electrical signals that the plant makes in between there. And these are what I'm going to do for the plants of for the notes of music. And so therefore the plant creates the melody. You as a human can decide the tonality of it, and you have some constraints, kind of like a guitar has frets, and you know that when you position your finger in certain places, it controls the note that you can make. Every instrument has kind of the sounds that you can make based on the instrument that you're playing, and so it's the exact same thing. This has a certain amount of notes inside that gives the plant the possibility. The thing that's fascinating about this device and what has really sparked the opening, and especially from a Dahmen perspective, because there's a few more. Dahmen kind of started working on a device like this in the 1970s. So we've been working with it for a long time. Today, there are a few others on the market. And really what differentiates the two is that being a spiritual community, yes, we love music. Yes, we make interspecies music with the device. Yes, we use the device in a number of ways. But more than anything, the device was a way to give the plants an alternative way for them to connect with us. Because sometimes as humans, we're a bit dense. And so speaking plant right off the bat, we're not just all there. We're not ready to like admit to ourselves that when we hug that tree, I get a message, or to believe that when I'm walking down the street, that leaf that comes down is actually the plant trying to say something to me. We're not there. And so the music gives us a bridge, an avenue of a language that both of us speak. They often say that we think that music is a language, but in reality, language is a musicality, because music came first. Music is what has always existed. And so that gives us common ground to be able to either constrain it a little bit and say to the plant, hey, I want to make music with you. So I'm playing an instrument that has this key signature and these things. Can we jam? And listening to the plant and what the plant creates based on that. Or, okay, I'm doing healing session. You have a free form here. Use as much of the notes as you can in order for you to share that healing that we know you have, because we ingest, we take essences of, we do all these other things. And now I'm going to give it to you in a form that's musical. And we know that music in and of itself is also a healing modality. So music and plant together really opens the door to a whole new form of healing. And then also for private kind of personal one-on-one discussion or group discussion where now the plant becomes a vocal, because it's one of the senses that they don't have right now, is that they do have the ability to make sounds, but not at an amplified way and
Right.
that we have and that we know. So therefore, this gives a new voice to the plant to enter into conversations, business meetings, other opportunities for us to interact and learn, and also collaborate more than anything.
That is absolutely fascinating. We'll link to more information about that on this page too, so that you can learn more and dive deeper if you want to. But it's interesting that you mentioned business meetings, because we're going to kind of move into the leadership side of your work. You do a lot of work in leadership and helping teams and groups and businesses and leaders. What can plants teach us about leadership?
Oh, so many things, so many things. Okay, I have to think about where to start really on what we're going to do, because that's the thing. Plants have been around for so long. Now we have to remember, plants always, even when they're in a pot by themselves, are always in a community. They're always in a grouping, because even if one plant is in a pot, you still have the soil, the microbes, all of the maybe other potted plants that are in the room. So plants are always collaborating and cohabitating with other beings. So therefore, on a leadership perspective, their ways of reacting to what are the conditions around them help us think differently about how we could, in a more natural way, react in our own business type settings. So for example, when there is a stressor, right? We think of stressors as a human being. We have given stress a negative connotation. We have made it so that a stressor is always a negative thing. But that's not actually the truth, because a stressor could be something that pushes me out of a habit and allows me to move towards some new way of doing things, which is exactly the way a plant approaches. What happens is when there's a stressor in the environment, so excess water or drought or things, the plant looks at this with an objectivity that says, okay, what is happening? First and foremost, what is necessary for me to survive? In other words, for me to really look at this new environment, to what is stressing me, and am I okay? Am I safe? Am I moving forward? But then from there, there's the opportunity to experiment, not having some of the connections that we have to definitions, to cultural barriers, to the right and wrong, and being able to use a different logic. The plant can look at that stress. And what we learn when we see how plants react to stressors is that they react to it with a form of experimentation, with a form of looking at, what can I get out of this? What is it that this stressor is pushing me to step out of? Maybe something that I have been doing all along, but in reality, today, now that the environment is changing around me, I can look at it and use it differently. So therefore, modification, movement, growth comes from a stressor. So when we work with plants, we start to see things not so much in right, wrong, good, bad, useful, not useful. We start to look at everything with a window of opportunity. So leaders can really take this as a way to redefine terms that in reality, from a human perspective, have been holding us back. We as humans have a tendency, because we don't photosynthesize, because we don't really create our own nourishment, we have a tendency to just live in fear. We live in a certain low level fear that my needs are not going to be met. And that guides a lot of my behavior. But plants photosynthesize. So therefore, they know that they're going to find that they're going to be able to receive what it is that they need. So when we look at that and we say, wait a minute, what if I was to assume that my needs are going to be met? And I can let go of that fear. Now, all these stressors or changes or all these words that we have historically given a negative intention to, and that our first inclination as humans is to go back and to stabilize where we were. A plant says, no, 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 no. I'm going to look at this and how do I stabilize where the new environment is? So I don't try to go back, which is a human tendency of like, oh, no, no, I need everything back to balance to the way it is. For a plant, balance is ahead. It's in the next evolution. You know, nature really has one goal, and the goal is to evolve. Right. And nature knows that it has to have multiple paths to that evolution, because if it had one, it would be too destabilizing. So therefore, every opportunity is more to move forward rather than to fall back. And so there's a lot of pieces that we can learn about how do we feel steady in the unsteadiness? How do we grow and be balanced in unstable environments? Like there's a lot of different aspects around that as just one example of many of how plants can help us in our leadership efforts.
And this is absolutely fascinating. You're kind of blowing my mind as I'm thinking about, I'm looking out, because we're surrounded by plants, right? But that term plant blindness, that idea that, I'm looking at these plants and they're so beautiful, but you're really making me think about how plants can teach really, and inspire, not just inspire, but actually instruct and teach. That's really fascinating. Is there a difference between the way people and plants react in a crisis situation? You kind of touched on this when we were talking about stressors, but in a real crisis, compare.
Yeah, so in a real crisis, plants tend to, first of all, they will take a second to evaluate. And that's a step that oftentimes we miss because we go into the, we start, if we have a lot of experience, maybe we'll start to evaluate what's happening. But oftentimes in a crisis, we react first because we're so afraid of this perspective of, not being able to survive through the crisis. Where a plant knows that given the modular nature of their bodies, then they can, of course, pull things in different directions. Like I can have this piece here that is reacting in one way, this piece of me reacting in another. I can come back into my roots. I can instead, bloom in a different direction. There's lots of different ways for me to react. And so one aspect that a plant acts differently is in their timetable. So first step is, okay, hold to where I am and evaluate what's happening. Then I look at small changes around that I can experiment with to see how those are going to react. And this is, again, something we tend to put all our eggs in one basket. I'm going to do one thing, right? A team has to pivot to something. We're all going to go there. Well, a plant will splinter off different pieces in a crisis. So there's many different little aspects of the idea that in a crisis, even the definition of a crisis necessarily is different because if a plant has to drop a part of their body, we will see that obviously because we think of the human body, we react with those same intentions. So a plant doesn't necessarily have that. So therefore they're able to try different things. So if you were to take the analogy of saying, okay, wait a minute, do I have to keep this whole thing together? Can I drop a piece of it? Because maybe right now that's not necessary. Can I take this and be dormant? Because right now that's going to go, I'm going to take that and put it into a dormant space immediately so I don't waste resources. Plants don't waste resources. They don't have to because they know that the resources, so yeah, they're going to be able to photosynthesize, but what if you cover the plant when you have a massive crisis right now? So they start to say, okay, first and foremost, what do I need for survival mode? This is my survival mode. Now, above that, what do I have to play with for me to test different ways? I can send a runner out this way. I can send a shoot in this direction. So what they do is maintain, first of all, the pieces that are most important, knowing, and when I say most important, literally most important, knowing I can drop some that don't matter. And then I start to allocate the resources that I have. Should I do cooperation? Should I instead send out something on my own? Are there allies? And that's another piece. Plant roots, we know when there are stressors, will send out signals for help. It's very common for plants to ask for help. Or if a plant knows I'm in a sinking ship, they will send out messages to relay to others. Hey, just so you know, I'm in a sinking ship. Be careful right now and up your defenses in order for you not to. So they react in a much more altruistic state to a certain extent. And this is why we know that human beings who spend a lot of time in nature tend to be more altruistic themselves. There's that feeling of going back to those roots of knowing, okay, yes, I need to take care of myself, but at the same time, I also need to make sure that my ecosystem is taken care of because I'm one individual, and what's most important for the constant evolution is that the overall ecosystem works and that the overall ecosystem is healthy. So these are all pieces that we can start to understand from a crisis. And the other thing, one other piece that I want to mention that's really important is that we have to sort of focus on the fact that crises are normal. That there are a normal way of being. And again, it's like that introduction of the stressor that I was talking about. We sort of almost need them in some cases in order to help us reflect on where we are and use them to analyze whether or not this is where we really want to be, or to take steps in a different direction. So if we look at certain crises either as cyclical, like for example, fire. So plants know that fire is going to be coming through. So what do? They adapt. They look at ways to create different parts of themselves. Cones for conifers that only open when there are fires, or they're going to create resins that really protect them, or they're going to move everything into their root system so that the top part can get charred, or they're going to start using more of the nutrients that come from charred plant material. I mean, there's so many different ways that plants say, hey, this type of crisis is cyclical in nature. Therefore, we're going to adapt to it. We're going to be able to work towards it. And so they start to really understand their environment in a different way. If we were to do that, if we were to see that certain things are actually happening on a cadence, then we could start to adapt and modulate. And rather than feel like we have to hold and protect when that happens, we can instead ease into it, knowing that we're prepared for it.
Wow. Wow. What an interesting concept. And you're kind of talking about plants, when you were talking about plants relating to each other and inspiring people to become more altruistic, it sort of, let's move into that idea of relationship. How do plants teach us about creating healthy relationships? What can we learn from them in that area?
This was an area that really blew my mind too, as I started to get deeper into it, because we as human beings focus a lot on the idea of, we have friendships, we have strangers, and then we have competition. Like that's kind of like our range of relationships. But instead, plants have a whole range of different types of relationships that also those relationships can change over time based on it. So we have something called, for example, a commensalism. We have different types of relationships where maybe one of the parties is getting a benefit and maybe one party is not getting anything at all. And we have, again, given that definition of, oh, well, that's somebody who's like leeching off me, or that's somebody who's getting something. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's a good thing. I mean, if we think about parasitism, which is one, it's easy for us to think parasites bad, absolutely bad, because anything relating to it. But isn't a child a parasite to a certain extent? And so if we look at it and we say, okay, wait a minute, plants are showing us that parasitism could be very helpful because the parasite is living off of me, but that parasite is doing a service for the greater community. And so therefore that relationship is important for me to nourish, which is similar to what we as parents do with their children. I'm going to nourish this being for 18 years of their life and probably more, in order for society to have the benefit of their existence, to have the benefit of their brilliance, of what is going to come based on their existence in the world. So those are the types of relationships that we start to see when we start to look at parasitism without the human definition, but through the eyes of a plant, through the experiences of a plant. The same thing we could look at relating to, again, that commensalism, or those relationships where one is getting something and one is not getting anything. But that might be something that is useful overall and that for you doesn't have a weight. And so why not do it? And so we start to give things new definitions, and that helps us then enrich our relationships. Also seeing how these relationships can change over time. There's going to be, talking about children, they might be parasites, but at some point you might be the parasite on the child in the future, right? We're going to go through different relationships in between where there will be mutually beneficial relationships and such. Ideally, of course, we want as many possible mutually beneficial relationships. And this is another place where the plants can help us better understand what does it take to actually create a mutually beneficial relationship. It's not enough to say, oh, I really like you and I like hanging out with you. That's great. That's a great relationship. But like, for example, our true mutually beneficial relationships, such as in business, which is, we were talking originally about leadership, has a few different characteristics that we've learned by studying the natural world and by studying plants in particular. We have things like, for example, you should be able to give freely the resource that the other is taking. In other words, if I have a business and another company has a business, it's not enough for us to just swap the exact same services back and forth, because therefore if I only can make a certain amount of whatever it is that you're asking. So you're asking of me to give you, I don't know, I am a printing company and you're asking me to print flyers for you and so I'm going to print flyers for you and you're going to in turn, I don't know, give me a massage. But let's assume that you don't actually need a massage. So really, yes, is there benefits going back and forth? Yes, but it's not a benefit that's really a benefit to you. So nature would never create a type of relationship like that as a mutually beneficial. They would make sure that it's something that both parties first need and that both parties readily make extra of. So if I only print and I only have enough ink and enough paper and whatever to print 700 flyers and 695 of those I use for my business, I'm not going to take away from my business in order to give you 100 flyers. That's not mutually beneficial. Even if you're giving me back something really awesome, because what I give should be something that's readily available and easy for me to give. Now, if you only want 5 flyers and you're willing to, I don't know, come and clean my office, that's a mutually beneficial relationship because you have extra time. So it's not a big deal for you to come and clean. I have 5 extra flyers that I don't really need, so I can give those to you. So there are lots of different little, what we call kind of deep patterns and sort of simple rules that nature uses in order to create that when we start to study and understand them, we can emulate. So we can look at plants as our models. And then we can go deeper by connecting directly to those plants and asking them to get into a little bit the definitions and the understandings, and that expands the way that we think about the way we do things, giving it a non-human and sometimes like what I call a plant-centric sort of logic. And that plant logic takes us back to our natural state. When we reconnect our plant logic or our plantness with our humanness, we start to expand into the true knowledge centers and true beings that we actually are.
That was interesting. I was going to ask you, just playing devil's advocate a little bit, we're not plants,
right?
we're animals. And there are certain things that we have learned and ways that we have learned to interact with each other based on the fact that we don't create our own we don't create our own food. There is competition, for food and stuff. But then, as you were ending what you were just saying there, that answered my question basically, because it's not about becoming plants. No. It's about taking what we can learn from this part of the environment and applying it to our lives as our animal lives, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I want to just break away from some of this more philosophical and esoteric stuff for just a minute and ask you a little bit about plants specifically, how you in your life daily interact with plants. Okay. We have a lot of people in this symposium who talk about forest bathing and forest therapy, nature therapy, walking in nature and various different things, having house plants, cultivating a garden, So I'm just curious to know what that looks like for you. Do you have a lot of plants? Do you talk to your plants? Are all your plants hooked up to musical devices? What do you do? Do you garden? Do you walk? Just give us a little sense of how that looks for you.
Yeah, I have two. So yes to a lot of the things you said. I would say that my biggest practices come in 2 different ways. One is, I have maybe 3 because in the perspective, I live in a beautiful area called the Valcucella Valley. It's a valley that's very pristine. So I interact a lot with nature from the perspective of I need to be able to see, I need to always have a window, I need to always be looking out, and I need to connect to the plants that are out there in that way. Like the window right outside of my home, there's a giant silver fir called Gary, and Gary and I have, our morning conversation with our tea. I also have I do have a number of houseplants. I'm very cautious about houseplants because I consider them my friends and my kind of yeah, my friends and my collaborators. And so therefore I only take in what I know I can take care of. Like, who can I really take care of? Am I able to care for you? I'm very cautious. I don't believe in gifting plants to people unless they ask for them, because I wouldn't gift anybody a dog or a cat
Right.
without asking. So I really move into the whole, these are individual beings, and does this being want to live with me? And I have been known to find new homes to plants that tell me, hey, this isn't my environment. I don't really want to be here. So my houseplants are really my friends and my collaborator. For example, Spider Plant is my business partner. I build a lot of my programs with Spider Plant. So we have a lot of different activities, both with the music of the plants and not, that we do on a regular basis. And so Spider Plant is one, Gary, the Silver Fir is another. These are sort of the way. The other way that I really connect to nature is I love, and this is part of my journey to in that reawakening, is to really connect with those that are unseen, to kin that exist in places that we have a tendency to not see. Grass is a huge part of my practice and my friendships and my connections. I love lying on the grass, not so much just from the perspective of, oh yes, I feel the grass, but to kind of, I see you type of practice, and really allowing myself. And when I lie on the grass, I tend to have as much of my body touching the grass as possible, because I really want that form. Some people do it with trees and they love to sit there. For me, it's really about grass. So grass. And the other one is, as I go through environments that tend to be more urban in nature, like tend to be more urban, period.
Yeah.
I look
Yeah.
for the nature. Let me rephrase. So, wild plants, I actually have a quiz to identify your spirit wild plant. So I love connecting with wild plants. So, looking for purslane in the cobblestones, and dandelions through the cracks in the sidewalk, and tiny little mosses that are growing out of like some pipe that's dripping water. Like, those are the beings that I really enjoy connecting with on a regular basis. So my practice is sort of embedded into my day, where, the plants that live with me, so my house, the plants that are the house plants that live with me, the plants I work with, like Gary the Silver Fir and Spider Plant, and then the plants that I feel like they're always teaching me new things about resilience and survival and balance and such. And so I've been known to like walk. Actually, just the other day, I was walking someplace, and I guess I gotten lost into this one tree that was in a very unusual location. And somebody I knew passed behind me, and they saw me maybe half an hour later. They're like, you were so immersed in whatever you were doing with that tree that I just couldn't even say hello to you. So I'm glad I saw you again, because the tree was in such a place where I know, how did you get there? What are you doing here? What do you feel like is important to understand about the location? How did you make those decisions? Like, that's really what I try to step into and connect deeper with.
Do you feel like that those relationships with plants, have they developed and evolved for you over time? Like, people who are interested in this, and they may be listening, and they may look at the potted plant on their desk and think, I'm not really sure, how to go deeper with this. Is it something that you've kind of grown into?
Yeah, it's definitely something that has come over time. I mean, I can't say that I went from one morning and then the next day I was like connecting with all these different plants and having these conversations. Absolutely
Yeah.
not. It's like a friendship. I mean, for me, it's very much been a friendship. And some friends are casual friends that you see as you walk by the street and you just smile and say hi to. Others are ones that when you have a moment you spend, and you feel like you've been seeing them every day, even though it's been a year, and you sit down. Like, for example, I have a tree in the Sacred Woods Temple, which I have a ritual connection with, and we don't see each other very often anymore. But when we do, it's a long conversation of two people that are having and connecting and catching up. So for me, it's not as much as I do survival. I do wilderness survival stuff too. And that has come out of my love of plants and understanding and wanting to be able to spend more time in that environment. But I wouldn't say that I'm the person who does like, I'm going to go on a nature walk every single day. That's just not me. I was born kind of in an urban setting. I come from an urban setting. I live in a non-urban setting right now, but I just have this deep I want to see who they are based on who they are in that moment. Just the same as if I was on a train or a plane, I would have a conversation with the person sitting next to me. I want to have a conversation with the plant that I happen to come through. So the beauty of this is that it has transformed the way I see the world. The world is more vibrant. The world is more full of possibilities. The world has more friends rather than enemies. I don't walk around thinking, these are going to hurt me. There's a relationship. And that's, I think, in part why I did the survival training and why I now work with people teaching parts of survival, because I didn't want to look at the world as an enemy. I wanted to look at the world as a friend and as a collaborator. I didn't even want to look at it as a guest only. Yes, I always say that we have three ways of interacting with nature. We can see nature, like we can look at a beautiful scenery, beautiful environment in front of us and witness. We can participate in nature, so we can be immersed in and be a part of what's happening. But the most important one that we tend to forget is that we are nature. And so stepping into that role where I'm meeting you, in my case for plants, but also with animals. I mean, I wouldn't walk by a cat or a dog. Just like when I go out of my house, I say hello to all the plants. Sometimes I have to give a global hello because you can't say hello to each and every one.
Right.
But the point is, I am nature and you're a being and I'm a being and we're all living in this together and we make up this. And so right. I have to constantly be pushing myself to remember I am in some ways that plant, not necessarily, and we're not the same species, but we are both living beings on this planet, adapting and hopefully making it better for the next generation.
What can plant senses, the way plants sense the world, teach us about our own senses?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics in and I go off on many different directions because we as humans have 5 main senses, right, that we know of. That's what we talk about, the sense of sight and the sense of smell, and our predominant sense is a sense of sight. So we rely very heavily on the idea of both physically as well as metaphorically, that if I can't see something, then I can't choose it or I can't work with it or anything like that. Where plants have the same 5 senses, but in different ways. And so first of all, just even approaching the same 5 senses and recognizing that I don't just see with my eyes, I see with my mind's eye, I see in many other kinds of ways, starts to expand. So when I start to connect with the idea that, wait, plants don't see from 2 things like we do, 2 eyeballs like we do, their entire leaves are photoreceptors. So therefore they see with their entire essence and their entire body, their entire physical body even. So if I have a plantness inside me, if I'm a being of nature too, am I really limited to just seeing with my eyes? And that's how we said sometimes I have eyes on the back of my head. What if that's true? Right? What if it is true from a perspective of there are other ways to see? So by entering deeper into the way plants sense, we start to then expand our own senses and really understand that there is a much more subtle world around us, even things that are very physical, but that we don't notice. And therefore we can't react to them or interact with them or learn from them or create with them and those types of things. And then on top of that, plants have another 15 senses. So when you throw on that plants have all these others, then I start to ask myself, well, how does a plant understand humidity? And how could I expand my own way, because not limited by my mind that says, no, I can't do that. But I start to say, wait a minute, I'm nature too. So how do I physically sense humidity? And then what changes in me? How can I act differently? How can I help with my body's healing? For example, we know that humidity affects joints and affects all these other things. So if I could sense humidity differently, would I dress differently? Would I in that day go to different places where, maybe that humidity is not going to affect me in the same way? We can use, it's not always just esoteric in the sense it's not just always, oh, I get this sensation and it's good for the earth or whatever. Yes. And I can make very different changes when I can understand my environment differently Maybe I place my foot very different and I don't twist my ankle because I understand and I can sense a different environment. Using my different senses, I can now understand that environment differently. Or maybe I wear different clothes, or maybe I move in different ways that day. So it really can boil down to even the physical actions that we take, enhanced by us looking to the plants and understanding their senses and then applying that to ourselves. Or even just being able to read how they react to certain senses and being like, oh, wait a minute, if a plant's doing this, that means humidity is high today. I'm going to go dress differently so that my joints don't hurt.
This has just been so fascinating, Tigrilla. Thank you so much for sharing this wisdom for us. And I want to just take a minute here in our last couple of minutes and have you tell us about this this gift that you have for everybody here, because I think there are going to be people really interested in wanting to go further with this and wanting to know how, what's the next step. And you have something here that's going to really potentially really help people connect with plant wisdom. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I have a course called Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom. It's a 7-module course that really goes into all of these things that we've been talking about. So it's about looking at the plant world and connecting and communicating with the plant world in a very different way. And this course is, it's a self-study, but it also has a live component, which I do monthly master classes. So hour-long master classes that allow you to get new information, to ask questions, to really push. And because I have studied with, the arts as well as science, as well as spirituality, the course is created so that you use all of these. Because one of the things that, as you were saying earlier, of like, do you just all of a sudden meet a plant and can understand plant? Well, sometimes a lot of plant logic comes in ways that we just don't understand yet because we're stuck in our human logic, right? The arts is a fantastic way to step around that, because I might not understand it, but maybe I can draw it, or I can dance it, or I can write poetry about it, or I can sing a tune to it. And that helps me assimilate and understand and start moving it from plant logic to human logic and expanding human logic. So the course is really designed to be able to take you through a series of different major concepts like life and death, what it means to be an individual in an interconnected environment, and what is food, which we didn't even touch on, but it's another huge topic when you start to look at plants as your friends. So and healing and stuff like that. So it looks at it, but it uses science, it uses spirituality, and it also uses the arts as a way. So it really gives you the opportunity to expand yourself using different modalities that can maybe sometimes get away and around the gotchas and the limiting beliefs that we might have.
Oh my gosh, so cool. So, and you're offering a great big discount to people in this symposium. So very generous. I encourage you to go and check it out. And we've got the link here on this page, and connect with Tigrilla and learn more about her work and expand your horizons in that way. Tigrilla, thank you so much for being with us. Any final words before we go?
Ooh, my final words is go out and just spend time with the plants. Sometimes the biggest ahas and receiving that arrives is just when you give yourself permission to believe and time to connect.
Beautiful. Thank you so much again for being with us, and have a great rest of your year. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.